welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Jackie. I almost forgot to say it because I forgot that we're in 2022.
Yep.
And I almost first said 2021 because I never know what time it is or what year it is. But I do love myself some grab.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
Yes, and we are all here in the year 2022, like Jackie said, to celebrate behavior analysis and behavior analytic research at this here podcast, where every week we pick a topic and find research related to that topic, except for this week. So if you thought that sounded like a great idea and you've never listened to our show, listen to next week's or last week's episode and skip this one. But if you don't care and say, I just want to hear people talk about research, well, then have we got research for you? This episode is going to be one of our patented grab bag, research grab bags. I thought someone was going to say something.
I love the grab bags because it is a chance for me to jump into the bag of all of the articles that have ever been created behavior analytically and swim around in them with my behavior analytic hat. Because if you know me, I really want a behavior analytic trucker hat. This is BCBA in the top with the mesh on the side. I really want to get them for our students, and Diana always says no.
I think the moment may have passed.
You know what? That moment never passed.
I'm gonna let you know after I watch the Von Dutch documentary.
Okay.
On Hulu.
Let me know.
Okay.
And then I'll make them for us all.
Okay.
With my Cricut. Just kidding, I don't have one. But I want one.
Yeah, kickstart that.
A lot of things.
Yes. Like Jackie said, much like a Scrooge McDuck in his money bin, we swim around in the research and we just find whatever article strikes our fancy this episode, these grab bag episodes. I don't know if anyone likes these episodes beyond us, but we like doing them, and it's our podcast, so there you go.
We used to do them every 12 episodes, but then we moved to just doing them whenever.
Whenever it suits our fancy.
Yeah.
Yep.
We just always have like an article or two, just, I read this, and we just put it in a little pile. But then, you know, from the big pile, of course, the giant articles we have.
Yeah. Basically, just one of us finally says, oh, we haven't done grab bag in a while. And that's when we schedule a grab bag episode. So turns out we haven't done grab bag in a while.
No, we have not.
And so here we are.
I remember, I'm thinking back, maybe I'm just getting nostalgic because we're getting close to 200 episodes of the show, but it does feel like we used to have such a great plan for certain things like grab bag. And it was 12 because we didn't think about it until the 12th episode. We said, well, we'll have to do one every 12.
The last one we did was 164, I believe. And I think this is episode 198. So it's been like a really long time. It's
not a multiple of 12 right there. No.
No.
Oh, well. Write in if you'd like more grab bags, or you think every 12 is a perfect number of episodes for a grab bag, and we'll maybe make that switch in the production schedule. Well, let's get to those articles, shall we? We each have a different article that we don't know until we pick the article, so there's no plan for a theme. Sometimes we accidentally find one, but I do not believe we have a theme tonight, other than we picked 3 articles. We're going to talk about them. So let's share the articles that we have, shall we? Who wants to go into the grab bag first?
Diana, I think.
Diana,
all
reach
right.
into the grab bag. Pull out your article.
Go into the grab bag.
Swishy, 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 swishy,
wow.
swishy, swishy.
That is convincing. Oh my goodness. And here's my article.
We need money for a soundboard and a Cricut.
Crinkle. Rip.
Oh, look, it's a brand new article. Guys, this is a 2022 publication.
That's good.
Yeah, it's the first 2022 article I believe we've had the honor of reviewing. And it's titled Research and Training Priorities of Staff Supporting Individuals with Intellectual Disabilities with or Without Autism. That was written by Simpson, Adams, Manokara, and Malone, and published in the Journal of Policy and Practice in Intellectual Disabilities.
Cool.
Yeah. So I was excited to get this article out of the grab bag because I increasingly enjoyed reading articles that are trying to like take the pulse of the field as a whole, right? And so this is that type of article that's trying to take a step back and say, what is it that we're doing here, and how can we maybe do it better / more purposefully? So that was kind of their goal here. And what they wanted to do was evaluate the research and training priorities for what they called care staff. So like not caregivers, because that would imply family usually, but like
or care bears.
Or not care bears either. They didn't note if anyone was a care bear. I believe that they were mostly
Humans.
clinicians. Yes. They wanted to look at research and training priorities for clinicians, and they said they were concerned that there was this research to practice gap, which we actually discussed in depth in episodes 172 and 173, if anyone wants to go back and take a listen to that. But they said that people have looked at it, and it can take 17 years for research findings to move into practice. So that is a really, really long time.
Mhm.
And, you think you've done all this great research and it's so exciting, but that doesn't mean that anyone's using that research from there. So there's a real divide between the two. And they said, well, maybe one of the reasons for that type of divide is that the questions that researchers are asking are not the ones that practitioners really need answered. And the best way for us to know what practitioners need answered would be to ask them what they need answered. But before we could answer that question, they wanted to build upon other research that's been published recently, which I also went down a rabbit hole and read that article too. But I'd already started taking notes on this article, but it's quite good if anyone wants to go find this other article, which was Roche and colleagues 2021. Adams, who was on this current study, is also an author on that Roche paper. So they had some ties between the two, but they said there have been recent calls for research to be led not by practitioners, but by what they called experts in experience, meaning the individuals who we're serving who either might have intellectual disabilities or autism. And the Roche et al. Paper did a systematic review of autism priority in autism priority settings. So looked at several different studies that had evaluated what are the research priorities for autistic individuals. And they had done, several surveys and then compiled the research from a few different articles. And they identified 6 areas. And I really just want to make sure we touch on them because I think it's important to do so. And then we can talk later about how it ties in with the current survey. So those 6 areas were 1, skills development and training from childhood into adulthood and employment. 2, physical health, well-being, and mental health of autistic individuals. 3, expertise, coordination, availability, and accessibility of services across the lifespan. 4, accurate identification, screening, and understanding of autism across the lifespan. 5, the developmental profile and cognitive thinking and learning skills of autistic persons. And 6, transition and support for those transitions, e.g. into adulthood. So I was excited to see those priorities laid out, and they wanted to, come at it from that perspective. So we would be thinking about, do the care staff's priorities match up with those of the autistic individuals? And to me, this is a really good place to be doing this type of research, right? Because these are questions we should be asking and then tailoring both our research and our care toward.
I love that.
Yeah, right?
We need to include this in our upcoming syllabi.
Maybe. Yeah, it's a good one. So that's the Roche et al. 2021, if anyone wants to go discover it. But the current study was looking at taking the survey data from 82 individuals who worked at a very large organization in Singapore specifically that served 2,400 individuals with disabilities, both in the school setting and in residential settings. And this, the organization was called Minds, and very, very, very large. They were also, mentioned in the article, wanted to ensure that they were gathering these types of survey data outside of just Europe and the US populations too. So they wanted to make sure that we were looking worldwide. So those folks who were in the study were recruited via email, face-to-face, and it said 90% had tertiary education. Does that mean a master's degree? Does anyone know? Tertiary education. I think
3rd level. So
the authors were Australian.
Graduate.
So I think it's just, they might call it differently. Yeah, does it mean maybe a graduate degree? I think that's right. But they just noted that these probably weren't the direct care staff, right? So these are likely the clinicians who are responding. So they sent out a whole bunch of surveys. They only got like a 27% response rate, but they got 82 surveys back to work with. And so in the survey, they were asking 4 main questions. How much did the participants engage with research? How much did the participants engage with training? And then what areas should research focus on specifically to support individuals with intellectual disabilities or autism? And 4, what should be the highest priorities for training staff to work with that same population? So it was a combo of open-ended questions, and then so they said, what do you think should be a research goal? What do you think should be a training goal? And then underneath that, they had 14 research topics and 16 training areas that previous studies had identified as likely to be what they selected, and then they rated those non-important to very important on a 1 to 5 scale. That was what they did in this study.
Just as a heads up, I looked up tertiary education on Wikipedia, and it had a very, very confusing definition that apparently varies somewhat across the world, and I think might just refer to any sort of specialized training in which you get a degree. So it may actually include some college. But it is not clear because they use about 7 different terms to describe various points of education, and I got bored reading it. So there you go.
Thank you for that. That was helpful. Okay, so to talk about results, in the area of access to research, and by that they just meant, have you read any research?
Mm-hmm.
Not even did research, just have you looked at research? Have you accessed journal articles, etc.? Most of these folks had very limited access to research, like once a year, 34%, or none at all, 25%. Additionally, 20% said, I don't need to access research for my work.
You know, I'm not surprised, but I'm saddened by it.
Yeah, I mean, when I first read it, I was thinking it was direct care staff, and I was like, okay.
Wait, it's not direct care staff?
It's like the clinician
level. That's bad. I am
folks.
surprised.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So that's what they got there from that question. And then for training, how much training were they getting? Most of them said monthly, 38%, or every 6 months, 30%. Some only said once a year. That was 21%.
Ugh.
So there's quite a range there with respect to that. And then for these research priorities, the top answers for the open-ended question of what do you think should be research priorities for individuals with disabilities, they said the focus should be on intervention, so like behavioral intervention, basically, 34%, quality of life,
Love
31%, and caregiver support and well-being, 26%. And then they went on and said, they asked them those 14 questions, right? And then they said a lot of people just put that everything was very important. Well, you know, they might have foreseen that happening.
Mm-hmm.
They said that the things that really topped out as far as most people rating them very, very highly was supporting families so that the families can then support their child, and helping families manage stress, as well as identifying strategies early on to maximally benefit individuals with intellectual disabilities to live their best and most independent life. So those were the things that everyone was in agreement on there. And then to kind of round out the top 5, they have a kind of a nice little chart that shows how the distributions were, and it's lovely to look at. But almost everyone rated all of these things at least somewhat important through very important. But the things that got the highest ratings were identifying intervention strategies to support people with intellectual disabilities, research on interventions to support families in times of stress and to generally support their child, research on access to behavior support practices, including reducing the use of restrictive interventions and including positive behavioral interventions instead, and identifying anxiety and mental health issues in people with developmental disabilities. So that was the top 5 of how they rated these already established research areas. And then in the training priorities, so again, they said, what do you think we should do for training? They mapped on pretty closely with their research areas, although it wasn't precise. But they said lots and lots of folks said training on decreasing challenging behavior was really important.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 35%.
Surprise.
I know. I liked this one. They said more training on the knowledge and understanding of disability.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
That is good.
31%. And then trainings on overall, like intervention, again, like such a loose term, or their increased knowledge of evidence-based practice as a whole. And that was 29%. So I thought that those were, you know, people were kind of thinking big picture there with those, which was kind of nice to see. It was also noted in those open-ended questions that ensuring access to training was really important because there was a bunch of those people that said they weren't getting training. So like asking them, what kind of training would you want?
Any.
Probably seemed a little missed the mark a little bit there. So there was that. And then the pre-made list, lots and lots of folks said that all the trainings were important, but specifically behavior management and teaching skills and concepts were important as like big picture. And then when you look at the graphic that they have laid out, which is quite lovely, behavior management really topped the list, followed by person-centered planning. So learning about that, understanding emotional issues, teaching specific skills and concepts, and understanding different support needs at different stages of life.
Mm.
Yeah, right?
Okay.
So if you think about how this might map on to the Roche and colleagues study, which was looking at the research priorities of autistic individuals. Just to remind everyone, that list had a lot of focus on the lifespan again, right? Understanding childhood to adulthood and transitioning between those time periods.
Right.
A focus on accessibility of services, developmental profiles for autistic persons, and then overall well-being and mental health. So you can hear a lot of parallels there. And access and understanding of mental health services, quality of life goals, overall views about family support needs, person-centered planning, how to reduce, restrictive environments, etc. So it was encouraging to me to, although everyone talked about it in different ways, it was encouraging to hear that there were some common themes throughout that, right? And it's just a survey, so it's not as though it's infallible data, right? But it does help us get a little more pulse on how people might be thinking about it. I think the authors were concerned in the lack of access to research and training that some of the respondents noted. So that's something that even before we get to like what type of research, what type of training, if people aren't accessing these things, then it doesn't really matter what we're doing, right? So, continuing to highlight that bridge between training and research or research to training really needs to be a stronger one than it might currently be is important. But I thought that, again, I like these like big picture thinking about things. And I found myself a bonus study in the process. So it was excitement all around.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Diana, for sharing.
You're so welcome.
Sharing those results from someone else's paper. We didn't make them. Well, I think this seems like a good time to take a little break. And then when we come back, Jackie, you and I can dive into the grab bag. Sound good?
I love diving into the drab bag. No, the grab bag.
Oof. Now someone's going to write a nasty review with that one as the title. All right, everyone. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back, diving into the grab bag of behavior analytic research. But before Jackie and I take our turn, I'd like to remind everyone that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to the show, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening to the show and then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/getceus. That's GET-CEUS. And enter in some information, including 2 secret code words we've hidden throughout the show. I'm going to give you the first one now. It is Magnolia. Magnolia.
It's such a pretty flower and a pretty word and a pretty name.
It's a movie as well.
Yep, Sweet Magnolia. And there's another one too. There's a show.
There's a show called Magnolia?
Magnolia. It's like about cooks on Netflix, I think.
Oh.
Cook. Like a single mom cook, I think.
I never saw the movie, and I don't want to see the show.
I used to live in Magnolia, Arkansas.
Ah, okay. Well, there we go. Lots of ways to remember Magnolia. All right. Well, I guess it's my turn to dive into the grab bag, or as Jackie called it before the break, the drab bag.
I didn't.
So I'm going to throw that bag out, print out all the articles again, put some lights around them to really just spruce up the bag. And now it's looking great. Look at this beautiful.
Swishy, swishy, swishy.
Sparkles
swishy.
everywhere. Here I go.
Crinkle.
Just swimming through.
Yep.
I'm going to spit some
Crinkle.
some articles up in the air, Here we go. Oh, look.
It's
Here.
not sanitary.
I found one. That's okay. We usually, for those of you who don't know, we usually print out all the articles and then we burn them in a big bonfire afterwards, just to really be eco-friendly about the whole process. All right, let's see what I have. It's an article, and it's my grab bag article because it's either about social stories or stereotypy, and it's stereotypy this time. This article is titled, Examining Stereotypy in Naturalistic Contexts, Differential Reinforcement and Context-Specific Redirection, by Steinhauser, Ahern, Foster, Jacobs, Doggett, and Goad from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis 2021. Now, this article, can I tell you the story of how I found this article?
Yeah.
I thought you pulled it out of a bag.
Well, okay, all right. I'm going to pull back the curtain, everybody. We don't actually have a giant bag with all the articles. I'm sorry.
I'm still going to make it when I jump in, though.
Yeah. But we'll just pretend with me for a minute. So I was looking through Java, I was looking through one of the more recent Java issues, and I saw this and it looked really interesting, and I was like, I'm going to read this one later, and I like to sometimes have an electronic version of it, so I can put it in my bag and read it when I have downtime. And then about 2 seconds later, someone was emailing me with a question related to stereotypy and is it okay to redirect someone to their work rather than, say, RIRD, where you might use sort of arbitrary, maybe matched, but somewhat arbitrary instructions. And I said, give me a second. And I read the article, and I was able to answer them very intelligently, and they were very impressed with my deep, deep knowledge. So in honor of this article making me look just so smart, I decided to share it with you all here on the episode. So, for those of you who do not have a lot of history with stereotypy treatment or stereotypy research, it's something we've talked about. We have a whole episode where one of the authors here, Dr. Bill Ahern, actually was on the show to talk about stereotypy. That would be a great starting point. But if you want to finish this episode first before going back into our archives, that's fine. I'll give you the gist of it. So, stereotypy is typically defined as sort of a repetitive, apparently or seeming to appear non-functional or non-contextual. It's
I don't think anyone says it's non-functional.
Well, I've heard it referred to as non-functional. I think no one in this field would refer to it as non-functional, but somebody who either doesn't work with autistic individuals very much or who doesn't think of behavior as having a function in the way that we know behavior to have a function, sort of see it as this, like, it's not doing anything. Like, it's not functional for another individual in the environment.
But it is functional for that person.
I understand it's functional for that, but I don't know why you're giving me a lecture on the article I'm about to discuss. Give me a sec, please. Gah! Getting jumped on here. And that's not safe. I'm in a bag. You can't jump on me. I will drown in these papers. It's not cool. Not cool time. Anywho, it is a behavior that, again, is usually doesn't cause any, concern to the individual in terms of harm, but it may be a behavior that can interfere with certain skill development, maybe, say, academic skills or life skills. Probably could also, and has, interfered with social skills. We typically see higher rates of stereotypy with autistic individuals. Now, what causes stereotypy to occur? Why does it keep happening? Again, the main hypothesis out there is that it is maintained by sensory consequences that it produces itself. But lots and years of research points to it is mostly going to be automatically reinforced behavior. So the behavior itself, the sensory consequences it produces is is the reinforcement there. There are a lot of interventions, so going back into way back in the Wayback Machine, certainly non-contingent reinforcement, DRO programs, you can use response blocking, overcorrection, and then one of the more kind of, I think, researched interventions is response interruption and redirection. This was originally described by Ahern and colleagues in 2007, looking at a vocal redirection. So whenever stereotypy occurred, the individual engaging in stereotypy would be instructed to engage in some sort of vocal response, whether answering questions, say this, make this sound, and they would have to have 3 responses in the absence of stereotypy before continuing on with the original task. Now, again, that was sort of the original RIRD paper way back in 2007. There have been lots of research since then looking at, well, could we practice other verbal operant training so that the individual is getting reinforcement for engaging in a response that would compete with at least vocal stereotypy? So could we look at manned training or tact training as well, and then maybe pair that with RIRD as well? So that research has certainly been done a lot. There's, looking at, is there other natural reinforcement that exists in the environment that could compete with stereotypy? And could we focus on reinforcement on other behaviors in the environment that might, again, compete with the reinforcement that comes from stereotypy? So again, lots and lots of research in this area, because one of the concerns that always comes up is that stereotypy itself is typically not harmful and provides a function for the individual engaging in stereotypy. And while those of us in the environment and the individual themselves as well might say this is kind of interfering, it's kind of getting in the way of other learning, it doesn't necessitate the use of IRD, which is at the end of the day, is a punishment procedure. So what's the reinforcement that we're going to pair with that procedure? Because doing it by itself, some might consider that to be unethical, because again, it's not like SIB, where the individual is in harm because they engage in stereotypy. So there was a study that the Steinhauser article that I'm going to discuss right now by Cook and Rapp, looking at the use of an overcorrection procedure during ongoing academic tasks to see if that assisted a participant in engaging more with the academic tasks. And this article really, I think, kind of takes that idea and asks the question, like, why don't we focus a little bit more on, say, context-specific redirection? I.e., could we redirect the individual to engage with the activity they're currently supposed to be, spending their time on? And then would that reinforcement of those different responses, that relevant activity responses, minimize the need for RIRD or minimize any sort of interruption that comes from the use of RIRD, which is another problem with RIRD. You're sort of stopping everything to respond to stereotypy before returning to whatever the original task was. And it's often seen as kind of a non-socially acceptable procedure. I myself have used it before. I've recommended it to individuals, and I do hear a lot of like, oh, that's weird. Like, I don't want to do that. It's too loud. I don't want to engage in this. So it can be a problem. So the purpose of this article was, what if we combined lots of forms of reinforcement? So what if we looked at reinforcement for some sort of contextually appropriate behavior? What if we used this context-specific redirection procedure in natural context? Would we need to use RIRD to see an increase in engagement for our participants and a decrease in stereotypy to at least levels that are allowing for appropriate engagement or some level of engagement with the target skill, whatever it may be? So that's the big purpose there. The participants here were 5 male autistic adolescents, and they were recommended for the study because, well, everyone said, hey, they sure do engage in a lot of stereotypy, and it seems to interrupt their ability to engage in a lot of different tasks. So what could we do about that? The individuals engaged in various motor and vocal stereotypies, but they didn't engage in a lot of problem behavior. They were able to sit. They had a pretty decent manned repertoire. They had decent discrimination skills, so they could engage in a lot of different tasks. The goal, even though this was not run in a classroom itself, it was run in research rooms, was to try to make the research rooms as much like, this is a quote, it emulated the natural flow of the participants' classrooms, again, in their research room or residence, is the end quote. So we had 4 different activities, different poster colors on the wall to signal what activity it was, to see, all right, how does this contextual redirection work, if at all, in some kind of commonly seen school-type activities? So first off, they had the 4 different activities that they were going to have the individual engage in. So the 4 activities included a verbal operant training context. So this varied. Again, this is one of those studies where like the gist of it is this, and then every participant had a slightly different procedure, which is great because it does point to the individualized components of this treatment, but it does make it a little harder to describe the whole thing. So please bear with me as best you can. So in general, the verbal operant training looked like what we think of as verbal operant training, but it was, different operants. Some individuals did these kind of discrete trial programs around tacting objects or pictures. One participant was doing interverbal questions related to the safety using an AAC device, also in a discrete trial training kind of procedure. One was working on a writing task, so they'd have a picture and they'd write about the picture, so kind of beyond tacting. One was answering questions from the Scholastic News that they read, so it was vocal responses as well as reading comprehension.
I love Scholastic News, by the way.
It's pretty great.
It's like great. I wish I had a weekly Scholastic News.
Yeah.
I learned so much from Scholastic News.
Soon your daughter will be in school, and then you can read the kindergarten Scholastic News that they get.
Yeah, but I want one made for me.
Oh, you actually want an adult one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Scholastic News, if you're listening, get on it.
Scholastic News for adults. I mean, they have ones for like
This is
high
called
school
news.
students.
No, I want Scholastic. I want pictures, and then I want. Did you know that a panda can do this? That's what I want.
Okay.
I want like
It's
news.
pretty slick design.
And then I want like a picture of a panda. Like, some people think that pandas aren't even bears.
I think they're related to raccoons.
Yeah.
Family. Yeah.
In any case, for the training, the operant training, there were various prompts, various reinforcement kind of systems, whether it was praise or tokens, but it was all around kind of verbal operant training. There was a manned initiation context. So basically, it was a giant menu board of various preferred objects that had been identified for the individuals with a paired item preference assessment. It was either pictures or objects, and they'd say, let me know if you want anything. And then the individual could manned for any of the objects on the menu on an FR1 schedule. They needed to have it, autoclitic frame. May I have? Or can I have? I want, please. And then otherwise, they'd use a leading question. Did you want something? If they just kind of gave the one word manned. So it was the manned context. The third context was the interactive leisure training context. So basically a turn-taking game. Almost everyone used some amount of like least to most prompting, various verbal directives. A lot of them received tokens for engaging appropriately with that game. And then the solo leisure context, which were 3 different known leisure items that the individual could engage with, and they would just sort of be given the objects and said, here you go, and they would get to engage with that object for the session. All the sessions were about 5 minutes long. All right, so those are the 4 contexts. Again, trying to look like a classroom. There might be some learning going on. There's going to be opportunities for, communication, so asking for needs. There's going to be some interaction with other individuals, and there's going to be some downtime, pretty much. The DVs really related to, amount of stereotypy. It was one of those, I love this. I did this way back when I was looking at stereotypy, and I was working at the New England Center for Children, where this research, I believe, was done. And it was like second by second stereotypy, which is really, really fun to watch those videos in terms of you need to be paying quite a lot of attention. But the focus on the second by second stereotypy. So stereotypy occurred, stereotypy did not occur. The individual was engaged in correct responses, incorrect responses, frequency of mands, all that stuff, as well as functional engagement with the leisure item. So those were the important dependent variables. They had done an FA for all participants. Stereotypy was maintained by automatic reinforcement. So don't have to worry about that there. And basically they started, and I did love this. I did love this. They started with a baseline in which the individuals already had a DRA procedure in place for functional engagement or for correct answers with, say, the verbal operants that were being trained. So that was their baseline. So the individuals were all earning some sort of token or praise or both for engaging in the tasks appropriately. And the mands were just reinforced themselves by, the receipt of the object or the item that was manded, as well as praised. And there were no stereotypy consequences. So that was the baseline. So there was an intervention in place in the baseline. I think this is important, and the researchers bring up why this might be important, in that very rarely is there not some treatment already in place when we're looking at stereotypy. So why not make the baseline? Well, what does it look like? Because for some individuals, when you reinforce appropriate non-stereotypy targets, you see a decrease in stereotypy. So why would we immediately jump to the idea that you need to have some sort of procedure in place to decrease stereotypy, right? So that was our baseline. After baseline, the goal was, are we seeing high levels of stereotypy even with the DRA? Are we seeing high levels of correct responding or interaction? Or are we actually seeing high levels of interaction and correct responding, but still seeing high levels of stereotypy? Or does the stereotypy appear to be interfering with that contextually appropriate behavior? We then move on to a contextual redirection condition. So the way this was developed, and again, I think this is kind of a limitation because it's one of the earlier articles to sort of use this terminology, is exactly how do you come up with the contextual redirection? It was an individual procedure. The researchers interviewed the primary clinicians working with the participants, to sort of get an idea of what would be safe, what would be appropriate, and what would likely serve to redirect the individual to the task at hand. So it looked very different for every participant. Well, not very different, but it looked different for every participant. But basically, they'd present the contextual redirection. I'll give you some examples of what those looked like. And they'd pause the timer. They'd implement the redirection every time stereotypy occurred. And then they would continue with that until there were like 3 seconds free of stereotypy. And then they'd start the session timer again in these 5-minute sessions. So we had a number of participants. We had Andy. His contextual redirection was saying his name and then making a statement about what he's supposed to be doing. So something like, Andy, we're talking about the pictures. And then there may be some physical guidance to interact with the activity if it were, say, the leisure situation. For Hank and Scott, 2 other participants, it was pretty similar statement about the stereotypy and about what the contextually appropriate behavior was. Something like, it's not time to play with your fingers, we're playing a game. And then they'd get specific directions, pick up the piece, put the piece over there. So they'd get various, specific directions about what was contextual behavior until, again, 3 seconds without stereotypy. For other participants, Seth, again, statement about stereotypy, and then verbal directives to engage in the contextually appropriate behavior, then some amount of physical guidance to prompt functional engagement for about 15 to 30 seconds. And then with Sam, it mostly kind of followed a similar pattern, but there was a little bit more use of physical guidance in some of the leisure context. So again, a little bit different for everyone exactly what a contextual redirection looked like. But it usually had some sort of a verbal statement of what not to do, what to do, and then some level of prompting to re-engage with the appropriate task. All right. If after the contextually redirection, rates of stereotypy were still high, and it was kind of an AB design, pretty simple, then there would be the implementation of RIRD. And surprise, they didn't need to use very much RIRD in these situations. They didn't actually always have to use the contextual redirection. I'm going to get ahead to the results. So it was a little different for all of the participants. I'm going to start with kind of a general summary, and then I'll go into a couple of the patterns of data that they saw. But in general, what was found was that there were some contexts in which the DRA procedure alone, so the baseline, really had high level of interaction or high level of responding, and, pretty non-interfering levels of stereotypy. And this was true for at least 2 of the contexts for all of the participants. So every participant had context in which, as long as reinforcement for some sort of contextually appropriate behavior is already in place, stereotypy is not that big a deal, don't worry about it. For the other 10 contexts that remained when all of those were sort of factored out, when the contextual redirection was added to those contexts where there were the high or interfering levels of stereotypy, there was a decrease in stereotypy and an increase in those contextual behaviors, or, in some cases, the contextual behaviors were always high. There was just the decrease in stereotypy for 9 out of 10 of those, which points to that perhaps RIRD isn't always necessary, or at the very least, perhaps there's a step in between reinforcement and the application of RIRD that could be added, and you might still be able to see, therapeutic kind of levels of treatment for the individual. So in terms of sort of summaries, I don't want to make any giant summary statements, even though I tried to think of some, and I had a few that I wanted to make related to these participants because there's only 5 participants. But it did appear that it was more likely during those the interactive leisure times seemed to have higher levels of stereotypy for a lot of individuals and needed the contextual redirection in order for the individual to either engage with the turn-taking activity or to also engage with lower levels of stereotypy. So that did seem to be a pretty common pattern. With the solo interaction, that was another one where there often needed to be some sort of contextual redirection in order to have lower levels of stereotypy, higher levels of functional engagement. So Sam was actually, of the 10 contexts where it was determined stereotypy is interfering, stereotypy is too high, Sam's solo leisure was really the only condition of all of these conditions in which RIRD was added to decrease rates of stereotypy to kind of appropriate levels, and it will increase the functional engagement to appropriate levels is really the bigger focus, which is surprising because, again, given that all of these individuals were recommended for stereotypy treatment because of their interfering impact, there were conditions right off the bat that when you just reinforced some sort of contextual behavior, stereotypy became kind of a non-issue. This also sort of points to the idea that maybe stereotypy is, I think this has been talked about before, that stereotypy might often occur when there's an individual who has limited functional repertoires. So rather than thinking of it as like, oh, why are they engaging in so much of the stereotypy, think of it as, wouldn't it be great if we reinforced other behaviors that would probably maybe serve as cusps or that would be preferred by the individual? Because I bet they just stop engaging in as much stereotypy because they'd have more responses to engage in, right? And if that doesn't work, well, what if we just redirected the individual to the ongoing activity so they contacted more reinforcement? And in some cases, you might find that actually is as effective or more effective, or at least precludes the need for RIRD. Again, also, when you're doing treatments, make sure you have reinforcement in place and use that as your baseline. Save yourself a step. Do you really need to know, like, there was so much stereotypy when nothing whatsoever was happening? Probably not. That might not be a great use of anyone's time. And then you also have to think about what are the contexts in which stereotypy occurs, because stereotypy is not something that just occurs at the exact same rate all the time for every individual. I mean, it might occur at a high rate for all individuals, but it might not. So I think it's important to get a sense of where is the stereotypy occurring the most, or where is the stereotypy interfering, rather than, man, that's stereotypy, I tells you, which is sort of a very narrow view of context of the individual. So, again, some questions for the future, because I think this is a really promising way to think of stereotypy treatment as less about we got to get rid of that stereotypy and we got to reinforce lots of other appropriate behaviors. So, is there a way to systematically evaluate treatment, consistently like this? Could we do this with more participants? Always a good question when you're sort of looking at a new line of research, right? And then how much, do some of those patterns keep up in terms of, usually with the contextual redirection, we saw a good amount of stereotypy decrease, functional engagement increase, right? There also, it appeared, at least for one student, to have been more effective than RIRD. One of the participants, Scott, had actually used RIRD previously, and it hadn't actually decreased his rates of stereotypy, but the contextual redirection and DRA procedure did. Again, that's one participant, so there's a lot more to be said about this, but might this be more effective in some cases than RIRD alone or RIRD plus DRA? Perhaps. Who knows? We got to look at these things.
You know what else we could do?
What else could we do?
It would be cool if we asked participants what treatment they liked.
Oh, yes.
Like did a replication of Hanley's treatment and did a concurrent schedule for IRD and DRA and contextual redirection.
You're right. It could be surprising. I think like that study, some of the procedures that we'd assume are non-preferred turned out to be preferred. So there you go. Yeah. We haven't looked at social validity. This also was a procedure that was run for 5 minutes, which, as we know, a school day is a lot longer than 5 minutes. So how well would this work over 30 minutes or 40 minutes of time? Would this be as effective in other acquisition tasks, like say vocational tasks? Would this generalize to other settings when it's run across these 4? And there was some talk about, the students engaged in some of these behaviors in their classroom, but not really, opportunity for generalization in this paper. And then how would we consistently choose those contextual redirections? Is it always say stop that plus, physical guidance to the task at hand? Is there a way we could assess that more effectively for each individual? Is it sort of a best guess, So a number of questions here, but really cool, promising addition to the stereotypy treatment literature. And I think especially as we're thinking of stereotypy less and less as, stereotypy. Most people don't do it. Therefore, it must be decreased as
I do it.
this. Well, everyone does it to some extent, right? But that's the point of this isn't a problem behavior unless it is interfering with learning, in which case any behavior could become a problem behavior. So this isn't some sort of its own pernicious thing or object. It is a behavior individuals engage in that has a function and that may or may not require what we would think of as a treatment. And if it does, how can we include the individual and how can we use interventions that are less intrusive and don't require some level of punishment? So I love talking about stereotypy research, and I was glad I got to do that with all of you. And now I'm done. And now it is Jackie's turn to jump into the grab bag.
Crinkle, crinkle, crinkle. Swish, 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 crinkle. I pulled one up that was published in 2021. MacNaul, Garcia, Cividini-Motta, hey Katya, and Thacker. And they looked at assignment choice on academic performance in an online class. And, as we are, right in the thick of COVID, kind of, for 2 years. But, right, so in the thick of COVID, online learning has become a thing, right? The internet is so cool now. It's like the coolest thing.
Did it used to not be cool?
Well, now it's even cooler, right? Because it makes things that could be inaccessible, accessible, right? Like when you're stuck in your house, you can see your friends. When you're stuck in your house, you can still go to grad school. So it just, really helps you out, the internet.
It just brings the world to you.
Yeah. Jackie, you want to hear my favorite online class?
Yeah.
It's the one where I go new tab and I just go to Amazon and shop for things instead of paying attention to my class.
That's
my
fair.
favorite.
That happens. But
All the
you know.
time.
But here, they provided an interesting statistic from the BACB that I did not know, that 50% of the master's program in the U.S. are online now.
What?
I'm just surprised. That's
Is
like
that
a lot.
All master's programs?
No,
or
no.
like the
BACB
Approved.
VCS approved
Okay.
courses.
whoa.
Yeah. And
But if they don't go to Regis College in person, they won't get to see you guys.
true, but we also have a Regis College online program, but we don't teach in it. But yeah, if you don't come in person, you won't be able to hang with me every
Nope.
single week for 2 whole years.
That's right.
Do you think anyone ever signed in to the online one and they're like, where's Jackie and Diana? Oh, they won't be here. They're over that direction, some thousands of miles from
Probably not. But
you. You can
yeah.
dream. You can pretend.
I can dream. And then we can also think of the commercial where it's like, do you want to learn in your pajamas? Sure, we all do. Do you remember that one?
That's literally the commercial that we put in for Regis College in
I know.
these podcasts,
Regis College.
which I'm sure everyone did not skip and they listened to the whole thing.
I skip my kids like commercials. But yeah, so I've been thinking about, we're right in our middle of our semester, and I've been doing some course design and looking at how I can better serve the students and that I work with, meaning my graduate students, right? And how I can make the class more fun, more engaging. And so I was like, ooh, this one could be about me. So the authors posit that choice of assignments may give learners control over their environment in an online learning format, right? Because there's not a lot of control in that online learning format. It's mostly asynchronous, right? You just do it on your own time. So choice of assignments give learners control, but they also, in the research, have demonstrated an increase in student gains in the classroom. So what they found is that if there's a choice of 2 concurrently available assignments, that choice alone may increase student outcomes across exams, across study behaviors, across satisfaction in the class. Very surprising.
Yeah,
I know.
That seems bigger than I would expect.
So the authors say that study guides and flashcards have been shown to build fluency and improve studying, respectively. And only 4 studies to date from this 2021 study looked at choice in online programs, but the limitations were that because you're offering lots of different choices, it's a more complex point system. There was a lot of choices in assignments, so then that's a lot of instructor work, right? So it's a lot of resources, a vast number of different due dates, which is, again, difficult for an instructor if they're, trying to grade everything and get everything graded on time. So the previous study limitations were saying that providing choice is actually not beneficial for the instructor, right? Because it takes more time. So this present study wanted to address those limitations by keeping the number of assignments and the weight of each assignment the same, but allowing students to choose one of 3 available assignments. And so, that's one previous study. So that's what they did. So they saw that the increased satisfaction, but not student learning outcomes.
Wow.
The students were happy, but you didn't see an impact on their grades. But one of the limitations of this last previous study was that the students didn't know all about the choice and no choice conditions. They just didn't
so they just
understand.
thought I had to tell you to do. Okay.
So
that makes sense. We looked at research before where one of the limitations is I don't think anyone understood that this was a new paradigm we were trying to get them
and
to.
they didn't.
Yeah.
And so, spoiler alert, happens in this study too. So the purpose of this study wanted to evaluate the effects of assignment choice on student academic outcomes. So they incorporated choice of assignment. So they provided either they're called practice assignments. You could do flashcards or you could do a study guide.
I love flashcards.
Me too.
They're great. I feel like they got a bad rap for a long time. Like,
did.
you're using flashcards with your kids. What kind of a robot jerk learner are you? I think flashcards are great. Like, why would you not want to learn to do something that
Quickly.
might be simple, fast, right?
Yeah. So that's what they said. Okay, flashcards are fast. Study guides are fast. These are simple. They're not resource intensive.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why they chose these.
Everything doesn't need to be a turn and talk assignment,
Right.
Especially if you're like, so I don't know what we're talking about. Do you? No, not really. Did you watch TV last night? Yes, I did. Let's hope no one asks us any more questions.
Yeah. Another thing that they did to simplify is all the students experienced all of the experimental conditions they used in alternating treatments design. And they also had an exposure phase prior to the study where the students learned about how to fill out the study guide, how to fill out the flashcards, how to do them before they were part of the study. To get them
So they knew what they were getting into when the choice came around.
Yep. So they had 42 graduate students who participated across 2 cohorts in a fully online course. Most students were female, 39, not surprising in our field. All students were in a section. They participated, were taking a behavior assessment class that was approved by the VCS, the Verified Course Sequence, ABAI now. So they could become, pending completion of all of their courses and practicum requirements, they could sit to take the BACB exam. They had the same professor across both sections. So they used Canvas, which is one of those learning platforms like Moodle and Blackboard. And the class was an 8-week asynchronous class. So each component of each module or each week was introduced in succession. So they had, meaning that the completion of one task allowed the student to access the next task in the sequence, which is awesome that learning platforms can do that.
I know it's not exactly the same as like some of our gamification studies, but that idea of like first do this one and now you've mastered it. You level up to the new assignment.
Level up.
It's so much fun. I'm always surprised my kids don't want to like do a workbook that does like the level up. I'm like, well, you kids are crazy. Like you wish these were your activities all day.
Right. So there's 8 modules. So 6 of the 8 modules, students completed an interactive practice assignment. So that's one of the ones that they could go through. So the materials included study guides and flashcards that were created with an online website, and they took about 15 minutes to complete, both of them. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I have not made a study guide in 15 minutes, so I need to talk to these authors. So that was awesome. I was like, 15 minutes.
Maybe they tried to keep it a little simpler because, it's a research study.
I know, and they're trying to
go crazy,
max it with the flashcards and with limited resources. I get it, but I was like, I love that.
That's good.
So the practice assignments were embedded into Canvas and were presented either concurrently in the choice condition or in isolation, which is the choice condition, right? So the dependent variables were the students' quizzes and the preference assessment. So the student quiz, they took the average score of all students per module quiz. That was the student learning outcome. Makes sense. And then the preference assessment looked at the proportion of students who chose either the flashcards or the study guides on each assignment.
But the quiz was a separate thing, right, Jackie? It was like you would do one of these activities.
You do the practice assignment, and then you take the quiz.
Okay.
Yep. And so in all conditions, the control condition, the choice condition, and the no choice condition, you had to do the quiz anyway.
Here's the quiz. You're going to get it no matter what.
So they used a repeated measure with an embedded alternate treatment design. The treatment conditions were counterbalanced to alleviate testing effects or, all of the effects, right? And so they had the students completed the lecture, completed the readings, and posted on the discussion board. And then they either completed a practice assignment, like a choice or no choice, right? And then a quiz, or went straight to the quiz in that control condition.
Okay.
So students were asked to dedicate 10 minutes to complete the assignment and could take as many times to achieve 100%. To receive full credit, students had to submit a screenshot of the score that they received because it was from an outside website. And that included the time they spent on the assignment and what their grade was. And if they didn't submit that, then they got a 0, or if they didn't spend 10 minutes.
Gotcha. Okay. So you got your quizzes one thing and then your score for the assignment the other.
So they had 4 conditions. And I said that the precondition, right, is the exposure phase where the students received instruction on how to complete the 2 practice assignments. So here's how you complete a study guide. Here's how you make your flashcards. And then completed both of them to make sure they had exposure to them. They didn't have that, I don't think, in the other one.
No.
So I love that.
That was an extension.
That was a good extension. Then the choice condition, the students had to mark true in Moodle for a statement like, I promise that I did all of these things.
Okay.
And so when they marked true in Moodle for their previous assignments, they had the option to choose one of, again, the study guide or the flashcard. When one was chosen, the other was no longer available. Then when that was done, they did the quiz. No choice. There was no pledge statement, and the instructor chose the assignment. So when they finished their readings and lectures and whatever,
just go take your quiz.
They did either, for the no choice, they did either the flashcard or the study guide, but they didn't get to choose. And then, it was counterbalanced, and then the quiz. For the control, there was no pledge statement and no practice assignment, so no points were available there. They just took the quiz. So procedural fatality was great, but modifications were made because the first cohort, 16 out of the 25 students completed both assignments.
So when you said it was blocked, it wasn't like it was grayed out, you can't choose it anymore. It was just, you shouldn't do this, and then...
Then they fixed it.
Okay.
Right, so the first cohort, that data had to be excluded because they did everything. The second cohort
go-getters
did
in
better,
that class.
right?
Jeez.
Oh, my goodness.
Bunch of nerds.
And I like this because it seems very simple, right? If a university instructor is like, I don't have time, I need to better my life, better my students' life, look how easy this is, right? That's pretty easy to choice thing to build into your learning platforms. So the results, the student quiz scores were a tiny bit higher in the choice condition, versus the other two conditions, but the results were not statistically significant.
Okay.
Wah, wah. There was also no statistically significant difference between the conditions, the choice or the no choice. And sadly, cohort 2 had higher quiz scores in the control condition.
Oh, so they got dumber as time went on.
But one of the things that they say in the discussion is that cohort 2 started during the start of the pandemic. So there might have been a lot of other things going on.
That's,
right?
You know what? That's a fair limitation.
Right. So they might have been like, I don't have time to do these practice
I don't want to keep
right?
choosing your stupid flashcards or
Mm-hmm.
the other. What was it? I'm blanking on
Study guide.
Study guide. That's
Yeah.
right.
So across both cohorts, about 51% of an opportunity students chose to complete the flashcards. 48, they chose to do the study guide. But that's pretty similar. And they said, incidentally, when they looked back, student chose the same choice across modules. So if they like doing flashcards, they did
that's just what they
flashcards. They like study guides, they did study guides. But it doesn't seem like there was a big difference.
Which did you choose?
Probably the study guide, because flashcards I'm not great at.
I'm also not great at flashcards, but I feel like I'm also not great at pulling up really precise definitions for terminology at this point. So I feel like flashcards would be a nice practice,
Maybe I like both of them, but
I know. And as someone who's part of my job is to I'm going to talk about behavior analysis fancily for hours on end. It's like, I want to make sure I got those definitions down a little tighter some nights. Yeah.
I know. So here, one thing I love about this study is that it was not all rainbows and sunshine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
We don't get a lot of those. Usually
No.
you get, and then even sometimes when you get crummy results, you get the discussion. It's like, wow, what great result. And I'm like,
No.
I saw your graph, dude. Those aren't that good.
Yeah, that's not what happened here. They were like, hey, we simplified previous experiments by programming it, making it easier in a learning platform with limited resources, because that's what life is, right?
Mhm.
But it didn't appear to have any negative side effects, so nobody outwardly complained, much to the experimenter's knowledge. But they said ultimately it made no difference whether we had the choice or no choice. Students didn't really show a preference for either assignment, so they said it would be important to evaluate the impact of the type of assignments available and student preference for assignments based on grades,
Mhm.
as well as choice or combination, right? If you had differential instruction on all of that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that you could be doing now.
Yeah, but they didn't assess the happiness of the students.
They didn't. So they could also include social validity.
Because I guess that would be
Right?
the other question of if the quizzes aren't going to matter or the scores aren't going to improve, but they are happier, is it a relevant factor to take into account?
I think it would be.
Well, I guess it
right?
depends on if the professor is more depressed. The happier the students are, the more work and depressed the professor is. I don't know. That might not be you got to balance that out.
Right, but yeah, so I think that's something that they say is a limitation that we would definitely need to put in is
Yeah.
some social validity or ask students about what
Did you like this? Did you care?
did you like choosing?
Did you
well, yeah,
prefer
right.
one
Do you
over the other?
do you hate doing these assignments?
Yeah.
Right. So that would be fun to do.
Mhm.
And the last thing I want to say is that they did note that quizzes across both conditions and across both cohorts got better as the class progressed.
Mhm.
But that's typically what you would expect,
see.
right? Because you see students now understanding what's expected of them. They've seen a quiz, right? That's why we practice taking quizzes, right? But I just love this article because they used graphs and statistical design, right? And, they tried.
I do love an article
They
where
tried.
someone's really trying.
And cohort 2 is in March 2020, right? So they were like, no! But still, okay stuff. Not great stuff, but okay stuff.
It does feel though like with the advent of online learning and how much how powerful our computers are and all the different software, it does feel like we should be able to make the learning machines of the 50s
Right?
and 60s like an amazing reality. And then there's always that question of maybe they're not as amazing as they were sort of hypothesized to be, or they were in those sort of analog days. Maybe there are some limitations that we're just assuming technology will fix all of these problems, and perhaps not all of them.
Right.
Though I think the jury's still out in terms of how much you can use your online learning to sort of maximize everyone's abilities. It still seems feasible. It just seems like there are variables that are missing, or there are pieces that just haven't had a chance to be asked yet. Because again, the research is going to come in the context of, and could you please teach your class as well? Which is, it's one more thing to add on. So we can't just devote time to like computers taking these classes to see what's the optimal outcome.
Right. And I always think, I think technology can do a lot, but it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Right? So we did some, during COVID, right? Our classes are hybrid classes. And so we have like a couple hours of video lectures that they need to watch, but they also have to come to in-person classes, right? And those couple hours of video lectures, couple hours takes me like 10 hours to make, right? And every year new things come out, so I just can't keep using them, right? Because science is science, so I have to keep making new ones every year.
It's a bit of a challenge. I think I even see that in say like primary school, where you think, well, maybe for really young students, addition's addition, and it's always going to be addition, right? But I go into classes where they're reading a new book, and I'm like, what are they reading? Tuck Everlasting? Are they reading The Great Gatsby? It's like, nobody reads those anymore. We're reading something that's more relevant, that was written in the past 20 years. And I'm thinking, oh man, and that poor teacher who was like, I've taught this book for 30 years. I have all the materials. I got to do it all over
it's just
again.
Lot,
it's like, it doesn't end. I mean, maybe there's a little bit more of a tail, say in K to 12 than there is, say, in like college or graduate school, where it's like, I need you to get a job, and if I teach you things that are 5 years old, it might actually impact your ability to do the job properly.
Do your job, yeah. It's like so hard, but I do love the idea that they're there, right? I think that I wish I could do both always, because I love the idea of having the in-person so that you can like work through things, but then having the videos so that then you can go back when you're at home on a Friday night and you're bored, watch on your couch, drinking wine. You're like, do I want to watch Netflix Heartland? Or do I want to watch...
Or my professor's video,
or do I watch
Netflix
Jackie McDonald
Heartland.
Module 2?
Sorry.
Right? But yeah, so I don't know.
Maybe it's a scale. Maybe it's less a matter of saving time and more a matter of scaling up. I want to have 500 kids in my grad program. If I spend all the time it takes to put, some amount of choice in there, which may or may not be useful, to have my videos, to have my hybrid learning, to have my discussion questions.
Right.
Well, now I can teach more people than I used to be able to teach.
Yes, right.
But I have to do a lot of work to get to that
there's
point.
The accessibility
But at least
piece.
it's more people, or it's more, it's easier to join in those classes, perhaps.
But anyway.
All right.
Cool research we did today.
Very good. Well, we talked about a lot of different things. So no dissemination station on these grab bag episodes, because what's the common theme? Man, there sure was some research today, right?
That's the dead train. He's sleeping.
He's on. But I guess we learned all about, is choice important in your graduate programs?
Maybe.
Doesn't seem to hurt, but
we don't know
if it's that effective to improve test scores.
Right. But also, this data were collected in unprecedented times. I haven't said that in a while, so felt good to say.
We learned about some possible alternate additions to how we think of stereotypy treatment, and then we got some insight into ideas for the future and what's kind of important.
What a holistic episode!
I know, we learned so much about everybody. Well, that brings us to the end of the podcast. Before we wrap up, I want to give you the second secret code word. I had a different code word, but I was outvoted, and this code word is supposed to be pretty, so I hope you appreciate all the thought that went into it. It's chamomile or chamomile. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Either or.
I
just bought seeds to put in my backyard so that I can grow it right outside my door and then crush it and make tea.
Oh, that's fun.
Wow.
Do you love that I always have these ideas that never come to fruition, like my blanket and my huge vegetable garden, and now this chamomile? But you know what? When I retire, I got a lot of work to do.
A lot of ideas.
You're like a plant shrub?
It's a flower. It's a beautiful flower.
You put it in tea. CHAMOMILE. Chamomile or chamomile. And with that, we come to the resounding conclusion of our episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We would really appreciate it if you left us a review on
Screeching to a thud.
Screeching halts to the podcast. If you left us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, perhaps subscribe to the show. If you're like, I like that grab bag, but I wish it were all about one topic. Guess what? That's coming out next week. You should subscribe so you'll make sure you're there for it, right? There are a lot of other places you can find us online. We're on all the socials as ABA Inside Track. You can find these posted on our YouTube page with the YouTube subtitling feature. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles that we discussed, as well as to our old episodes and places to purchase CEs and other things like, merch and gift certificates and stuff like that. And if you want even more ABA Inside content, why not go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for $5 a month, You can subscribe to us, get everything a week ahead of time, some discounts in the CE store, and access to some of our special features, things like our special Q&As, our live episodes that we do once per quarter. And if you want even longer, I need 2 hours or more of podcasting, well, join the $10 premium level to access our quarterly book club, where we just finished discussing the book Look Me in the Eye by John Elder Robison, a memoir about a man who was never diagnosed with Asperger's because it did not exist as a diagnosis throughout his life in the 60s and 70s. We talked all about that and what that might mean for thinking of the whole individual and thinking of an individual through the lifespan. But if you want to hear that discussion right now, there's only one way to do that, as well as to get access to all the other book clubs we've done, and that's go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And while we want to thank all of you for listening, we also have to thank some folks who helped make this podcast. That includes Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial design, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with, like we promised, an episode on a given topic, and a full-length one at that. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye! Bye!